argumentation that can make an argument or statement invalid or misleading.
A false dilemma is a fallacy that misrepresents an issue by presenting only two mutually exclusive options rather than the full. So, for example, if we don't order pizza in dinner, we'll have to eat the week-old spaghetti in the fridge. So, obviously, you have more dinner options. You can whip up something in what's in your cabinets. You can go grocery shopping, or you can order something other than pizza. But the other arguing in favor of pizza here is presenting week-old spaghetti as the only other choice, making the pizza look like the only good option in comparison. So this is why the false dilemma fallacy is something called fallacy, or either. It presents a scenario with a multiple option and outcomes as a binary situation, often presenting one option as the only good choice. So, the second types of logical fallacy is appeal to ignorance. So this fallacy, an argument from ignorance, is an assertion that a claim is either true or false because of a lack of evidence to the contrary. The speaker assumes that their position is true because it has no been or cannot be proven false, or that their opponent's position is false because it has not been cannot or cannot be proven true. So for example, the third logical fallacy is a slippery slope. So a slippery slope argument, a course of action is rejected because with a little or no evidence, one insists that it must or it will lead to a chain reaction resulting in an undesirable end or ends. The slippery slope involves an acceptance of succession of events without different or direct evidence that this course of events will happen. So for example, complex question fallacy and begging the question fallacy are similar in that they are both based on assumptions. So however, there is a difference between them. So, a complex fallacy is occurs when someone asks a question that presupposes the answer to another question that has not been established or accepted by the other person. So, for example, the fifth logical fallacy is appeal to force. So, appeal to force is a fallacy or false argument that is based on the threat or harm and is not relevant to the argument itself. In short, the threat does not prove or disprove the truth of the statement. So, for example, the sixth appeal to pity or appeal to pity is a fallacy in which someone tries to win support for an argument or idea by exploiting one's opponent's feelings or pity or guilt in your audience or opponents. It is a specific kind of appeal to emotion. So, for example,
Appeal to consequences is a technique used in persuasive writing and speaking, where the writer or speaker emphasizes the potential consequences of not following a particular course of action. The goal is to make the reader or listener understand the importance of taking a specific action by highlighting the potential negative outcomes that could result from not doing so. For example, if someone were to say you're just a stupid, lazy slacker, so your idea for a new business is probably a bad one. This would be an appeal to consequences because instead of addressing the merits of the business idea, the speaker is attacking the person who came up with it. Bandwagon fallacy is a type of logical fallacy that occurs when someone argues that an idea or position is correct or popular simply because many people believe it or support it. In other words, it's the idea that everyone's doing it, so it must be right. This fallacy is problematic because it doesn't take into account the quality or merit of the idea itself. Just because a lot of people believe something doesn't mean it's true or good. For example, at one time many people believed that the earth was flat, but that didn't make it true. We all know that the bandwagon is something popular. The other is someone argues that an idea or position is correct or popular simply because many people believe it or support it. Attacking the person or ad hominem fallacy is a type of logical fallacy that occurs when someone argues against an idea or position by attacking the person who holds it, rather than addressing the idea itself. This fallacy is problematic because it doesn't address the substance of the argument and instead tries to discredit the person making the argument. For example, this person tries to discredit an argument by attacking the person making the argument rather than addressing the argument itself. This fallacy is often used to distract from the issue at hand and can be seen as a form of bullying or intimidation. It is not a valid way to engage in a productive discussion or debate. Appeal to authority is a persuasive technique where the writer or speaker uses the opinion or endorsement of an authority figure to support their argument or position. This can be an effective way to establish credibility and convince the audience of the validity of the argument, as people are more likely to trust and respect the opinions of experts or well-respected individuals in a particular field. However, it's important to note that an appeal to authority is not always a foolproof way to win an argument. The authority figure may not always be seen as credible or trustworthy by the audience, and the argument may still be subject to criticism or debate. For example, if a doctor recommends a certain medication for a specific condition, their endorsement carries weight because they are an authority in the field of medicine. Similarly, if a well-respected business leader endorses a particular strategy or approach, their opinion may be seen as authoritative and influential. Anonymous authority refers to the power or influence wielded by an individual or group without being explicitly recognized or acknowledged as such. In other words, it's the ability to shape opinions, make decisions, or take actions without being directly accountable or traceable. In some cases, anonymous authority can be seen as a positive force, allowing individuals to speak freely and share their ideas without fear or retribution or judgment. Anonymous authority can also be problematic as it can be used to spread misinformation, propagate harmful ideas, or engage in illicit activities. For instance, For instance, anonymous online users can spread false information. Trolls can harass individuals without accountability, and anonymous hackers can engage in cyber attacks without being traced. Overall, anonymous authority can be both empowering and dangerous, depending on how it's used and the context in which it operates. It's important to recognize the potential benefits and risks associated with anonymous authority and strive for transparency and accountability in our interactions, whether online or offline. For example, anonymous sources can provide valuable information to journalists Anonymous. Whistleblowers can expose wrongdoing without fear of reprisal, and anonymous artists can create works that challenge societal norms without fear of censorship. Hasty generalization is a logical fallacy that occurs when someone draws a conclusion based on insufficient or biased evidence. It's like making a judgment about a whole group of people based on a single person's behavior, or assuming that something is true for everyone because it's true for a few people. It is important to be aware of hasty generalization and try to avoid making them because they can lead to unfair and inaccurate conclusions. We should always try to gather more information and consider different perspectives before making a judgment. For example, if someone said I met a rude person from that city, so everyone from that city must be rude. That would be a hasty generalization. It's not fair or accurate to make a blanket statement about a whole group of people based on the one person's behavior.
Relevant conclusion. A relevant conclusion is an argument which argues to prove your claim or statement. Example: we must support the fight for gender equality. In this statement, we must argue or give evidences to support your claim that everyone has equal rights, girls, boys, gays, lesbians, or whatever you are. Strawman. A strawman is a type of argumentative fallacy where an individual or group misrepresents or distorts the opposing position in a debate or argument. This typically involves exaggerating or twisting the opponent's stance, making it easier to attack or refute. It occurs when the position of the opposition is twisted so that it is easier to refute. Example: I accomplished nothing this week because I was going through certification. How can you say that certification is a waste of time? Certification for what? Without certification, management would be reduced to randomness. In this case, the person is saying that they accomplished nothing during the week because they were going through certification. However, the strawman fallacy is represented in the responses to this statement. The responses exaggerate the original statement, create arguments that were not made, and attack those exaggerated arguments. Affirming the consequent. Affirming the consequent is the action of taking a true statement and invalidly concluding its converse. In formal logic, a conditional statement is made up of two parts, the antecedent F and the consequent then. In affirming the consequent, one starts with a conditional statement where the antecedent implies the consequent and then incorrectly concludes that if the consequent is true, then the antecedent must also be true. Example: no thanks. Every time you tell me to get at, it ends up raining. This statement demonstrates the fallacy by assuming a cause and effect relationship between the act of being told to get at and the subsequent rain. However, it fails to consider other potential factors causing the rain or disregards coincidence as a plausible explanation. Denying the antecedent. Denying the antecedent, sometimes also called inverse error or fallacy of the inverse, is a formal fallacy of inferring the inverse from an original statement. It occurs when someone incorrectly claims that if the antecedent is false, the consequent must also be false. Example: if beer is free, students are happy. Beer is not free, therefore students are not happy. The statement is an example of the logical fallacy, known as denying the antecedent. This fallacy occurs when someone assumes that if the antecedent, the first part of a conditional statement, is false, then the consequent, the second part of the conditional statement, must also be false. In this case, the conditional statement is if beer is free, students are happy. The antecedent is beer is free, and the consequent is students are happy. Consistency in terms of a fallacious argument, two or more propositions are asserted that cannot both possibly be true. In a more general sense, holding two or more views or beliefs that cannot be all be true together. It occurs when arguments contradict one another. Example: I like going outside. I like to stay at home. In this specific example, the literal agent states two contradictory statements: I like going outside and I like to stay at home. These statements cannot both be true simultaneously because they present opposite preferences or desires. Liking both going outside and staying at home is not logically possible as they are mutually exclusive activities. Hence, the inconsistency fallacy is demonstrated in this instance.
Factors on authenticity and validity of evidences and information. Before we start, let us know first what is authenticity. Authenticity refers to the trustworthiness of a record as a record. An authentic record is one that is what it purports to be and has not been tampered with or otherwise corrupted. Authenticity is established by assessing the identity and the integrity of the record. It must be possible to ascertain at all times what a record is. When it was created, by whom, what action or matter it participated in. So the first factor on authenticity and validity of evidences and information is the relevance of the source. It is how well does the source support your stand. Or you can check the title, table of contents, summary, introduction, or headings of the text to have a sense of its content. So the second is authority and author's qualifications. Is the author's name identified? Is the author's background, education, or training related to the topic? If the source does not have an author, think twice before using it. Legitimate academic texts must include citations. Citations demonstrate that the writer has thoroughly researched the topic and is not plagiarizing the material. Third, currency and date of publication. What is the date of the publication? In most fields, the data from the older publications may no longer be valid. As much as possible, the date of publication should be at most 5 years earlier. So the fourth is contents and accuracy of information. Does the author have a lot of citations in his or her text and or bibliography or works cited section? You do not want to use source that is disputable, so make sure to verify your findings with multiple sources. So the fifth and last factor on authenticity and validity of evidences and information is location of sources. Where was the source published? Was it published digitally or in print? Is it a book, an academic journal, or a reputable news source as? Does it provide complete publication information such as authors, editor or editors, title, date of publication, and publisher? What is the URL of the website? Avoid using blogs or personal homepage and wiki sites like Wikipedia, Wiktionary, or Wikicodes. If the URL includes the top-level domain ed, then that means that it has been published by an academic institution such as university. Common URLs include government, organizations, commercial sites, network infrastructures. In academic writing, reputable sites are those with education government, net, and organization in URL.
Presentation of reasonable arguments and factual evidences to defend a stand. Here are some guidelines in presentation of reasonable arguments and factual evidences to defend a stand. First, contains a clear proposition or statement that must be defended. Second, assesses conflicting opinions or opposing views on the issue. Third, takes a firm stand on the issue. Fourth, lists arguments in an organized manner to defend the stand. And lastly, consider your audience or reader.
A false analogy is the assumption that if two things are alike in one regard, they must be alike in another ways. It is also known as a weak analogy, faulty analogy, false metaphor, bad analogy, questionable analogy, or faulty comparison. For example, if someone were to say, just like a car needs gas to run, a person needs money to be happy. This would be a false analogy. While it's true that cars need gas to run, it's not true that people need money to be happy. Happiness is a complex emotion that can't be reduced to a single factor like money. Fallacy of accident. A fallacy of accident is also called as destroying the exception or a dictu simpliciter ad dictum secundum quid. It is an informal fallacy and a deductively valid but unsound argument occurring in a statistical syllogism, which is an argument based on a generalization. When an exception to a rule of thumb is ignored, it is one of the 13 fallacies originally identified by Aristotle in Sophistical Refutation. The fallacy occurs when one attempts to apply a general rule to an irrelevant situation. For example, if someone were to argue that a particular person is inherently clumsy because they accidentally knock over a vase, that would be an appeal to accident fallacy. The fact that the person knocked over the vase does not necessarily mean that they had a moment of carelessness or that they were not paying attention in that particular instance. Post hoc. Post hoc is a fallacy because a particular order of event does not necessarily prove a causal relationship between them. It is unclear when the post hoc fallacy first came into use, but it has been foundational as a part of logic and rhetoric since centuries. For example, I sneezed, the power went out. Therefore, my sneeze caused the power outage. It is clear that the two events are not related, but the person making the argument is assuming that because one happened after the other, there must be a causal connection. Wrong direction is a logical fallacy that occurs when a cause mistakenly considered an effect. For example, we don't ban this book, it will corrupt the minds of our children and turn them into criminals. It's clear that the argument is based on a false premise. There is no evidence to suggest that reading a certain book will turn someone into a criminal. In fact, reading can actually have positive effects on a person's cognitive development and critical thinking skills. Complex cause. A single cause is identified when the effect is actually caused by a number of interacting objects or events. The result is oversimplification or reductionism. A variation of this fallacy is the feedback loop, where the effect is itself a part of the cause. Many of the interactable disagreements we have debated for generations are so difficult because it's so difficult to isolate the relevant or primary causes to an effect. For example, the only reason why people are poor is because they are lazy. This statement oversimplifies the complex cause issue of poverty by suggesting that a single factor, which is the laziness, is the sole cause of poverty, when in reality, poverty is the result of access to education, limited job opportunities, discrimination, and inadequate social safety nets.